Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, hello, hello. I'm so happy to have those of you that are already hopping on this morning here in East Coast time. We are both actually in Florida, Jennifer and I, which is really, really cool. So thank you so much for already hopping on and showing your support to Jennifer and the Her Version community. As you know, Her Version is a platform built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I am speaking with an amazing woman, as I said, named Jennifer Silliman. Jennifer is an advocate for women who have or are suffering from postpartum and is a firm believer in creating community around the subject in order to educate more women. She is the creator of Dark Side of the Full Moon, which is both a film and a podcast that delves into the unseen world of maternal mental health in the United States. She is here to share her own story and also give hope to those that are suffering and those that feel the guilt of the past postpartum feelings. We are excited to learn more and are so grateful for the time she's giving us today. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to sit and chat with me and us.
Sure.
We so appreciate the women who come on and understand the mission of what we're trying to do here and just educate others in areas of which we're not so educated in. So
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
so true, especially this topic.
Yeah.
This is like a big topic that is still very stigmatized and not talked about. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you giving me this platform to be able to educate and spread a little hope to some moms that might be listening, of course.
Yes, 100%. So, what I want to do first, if you don't mind, is just kind of get a little bit of your backstory, how you ended up in this arena of, starting a podcast and having a film based around postpartum, and kind of get a little bit of your journey, and then kind of go from there. Is that fine?
That's fine.
Awesome.
Yeah. So my journey starts with my pregnancy, which was 2009. So long ago. It's hard to believe I have a soon to be 13-year-old. But yeah, it started actually during my pregnancy, and it's so interesting because when people hear uh postpartum depression, they assume, right, that it happens postpartum, like after you've had your baby. And
Yeah.
mine actually started in my third trimester. I started having a lot of anxiety, panic attacks pretty frequently, and I had something that is called intrusive thoughts, which are really best described as like a horror movie in your brain. So you pretty much think of any awful thing that could happen to you or your newborn, and those images and thoughts kind of just play out in your mind. And usually you become OCD with them, so they're obsessive, and so they kind of play like a broken record in your head constantly, and they're very debilitating. And you can't really control them. When you try to control them, they just get worse, and they're scary. I don't Because they're not talked about, and that was one thing that I remember looking back into the childbirth education classes that I took, that no one talked about this. Postpartum depression was touched on briefly, but there really was no explanation, one, that it could even happen when you're pregnant. And so when it happened when I was pregnant, I was really concerned, like, what is this? And it's very scary, and I'm having a lot of anxiety. So what I basically thought it was, I had placenta previa, which basically means I can't have a normal birth. I was going to have a cesarean. And so my cesarean section was scheduled. And I just thought maybe I'm having these thoughts because I'm scared of the surgery. I never really had major surgery before. I was just trying to think of every reason that this would be happening to me. And to make a very long story short, I suffered for 3 months pregnant. I suffered for 3 months postpartum. Um, really started to consider taking my life because I was so debilitated, and really just started to think that my daughter and my husband would be better off with me just not being here. Um, and that's when I knew that I wanted to get help, because I didn't want to take my own life, but I wanted the pain to stop, and I wanted the debilitating thoughts to stop. And so I call it my coming out. I came out to my husband like, hey, all these things are happening to me and I don't know what they are. And please just promise me that you're not going to leave me or take my daughter from me. But I'm having really scary thoughts of hurting myself and hurting her. And I don't know what these are. And so luckily I was already under the care of a therapist. Unfortunately, the therapist never asked the right questions. It was also a male, very sweet teddy bear kind of a guy, but just I never trusted him enough to share with him the thoughts that I was having. And so I never did. And finally, when I came out to my husband, he was like, we need to call your doctor on Monday and be honest with him with what's going on. Luckily, there was a psychiatrist in the group where I went in their practice, and I was able to get an emergency psychiatric appointment that same day. And that was the woman who ultimately saved my life, and the reason why I'm here sharing my story with you today. Otherwise, I don't really think I would be. I mean, she got me on the right medication. She explained to me what was going on. I started treatment, and within a few days, the thoughts went away. It was it was insane that it just like that turned off for me, which doesn't typically happen. So I was very lucky in that sense. And then I continued with medication for 2 years and therapy as well. But it was more for me, the medication. I was able to, really have and develop coping skills with any symptoms that I might have while even being on medication. And I met my co-producer Maureen, and we made a film about it. And it's so interesting because the therapist that I was seeing, who was the big teddy bear kind of a guy, specifically told me that I need to be careful with who I shared my story with, and that if I shared it with certain people, I might lose family members, friends, I might not be able to get a job, and things like that. And I thought to myself, see, this is why this happened the way it did, because coming out of the therapist's mouth was basically this idea that you cannot tell anybody what happened.
Wow.
And so I'm like, well, this is part of the stigma. And my first thought was, I am going to stand on the tallest mountain that I possibly can, and I'm going to shout it so that every single person on this earth can hear my story and know that they can get better. And so my way to do that was, when the opportunity presented itself, was to make a film. I'm like, oh, I'll be able to touch a lot of people with this. So that's how the film came about. And it's just been an amazing ride since then. I mean, that film came out in 2015. So it's been out for some time. And yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible journey. I feel lucky to be able to share my story and ultimately save families, save lives, and be able to give these moms hope and these families hope that they'll get better. But they need to seek out treatment, and you don't have to be scared to do that. And I think that's, moms are really scared to come forward and admit the way that they're feeling. So that's kind of the long story short. But But yeah, so many amazing things have happened since then too, and I'm sure we'll get into those. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It's such an incredible feeling to know that I'm making a difference like that. I mean, it's really incredible.
Yeah. What's the difference between why do they call it postpartum if it could happen during pregnancy?
Right. So I think the biggest misconception is postpartum is a time period. It's not an illness. So when people say I have postpartum, just saying it like that really doesn't even make sense because postpartum is just a time period. It's not postpartum is not postpartum depression. Postpartum is just postpartum. And so there is a huge spectrum of illnesses that fall in what we actually should be calling them perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So they call them PMADs. So perinatal is one word that we use to describe pregnancy and postpartum. So the perinatal period is that entire time around a pregnancy and that first year after giving birth. And their mood and anxiety disorders. Most women don't actually suffer from postpartum depression. They suffer with anxiety while they're pregnant. And so when we just call it PPD and we coin that term postpartum depression, it eliminates an entire group of women that are not depressed and they're still pregnant. They haven't had their baby yet. But that's just the way it's talked about in the media, the way that it's even talked about at childbirth education classes. We just say, oh, it's okay. It's just postpartum. But postpartum is not an illness. It's a time period. And I just think that education just hasn't really been taken seriously as far as the terminology, but the terminology is so important. I mean, this is how we explain it to our doctors. It's how education is explained to families who are going to be going, potentially through this. I mean, it's 1 in 3. It's a
Yeah.
pretty high number of people that are going to suffer from something.
Yeah. What would somebody call it then? If they're not, I know you just said it, but can you repeat it? It's not postpartum,
It's a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So the acronym is PMAD, PMAD. So I think it's important if a mom is having anxiety, she should not go. Okay, so if a mom's having anxiety and she's already had her baby, she should not go to her doctor and say she has postpartum depression. You don't. You have postpartum anxiety, right?
got it.
And that's why women who are pregnant don't seek help because they don't know what to call it. They're like, I know I'm pregnant. I don't have postpartum depression. I haven't had my baby yet. And the association of, oh, well, people think it only happens during postpartum because they feel like it's that hormonal drop that causes all these moods. And so I can't have anything like that while I'm still pregnant, when the truth is you can. And it's not always a hormonal drop. I mean, there are so many other things that can cause a woman to have some sort of mood disorder while she's pregnant or postpartum.
Yeah. And, a little bit about my story, pregnant at 20 and was a sinner. So was completely abandoned from my family and my church, just totally disowned me overnight. So when I had my baby, I dealt with a slew of suicidal thoughts and wanting to kill my baby thoughts. And I choked it up to my fucked up situation.
Right.
So, how is there things that decipher the difference, like here, that you could tell me? Or is this just like you have to go see a doctor and just figure it out?
You mean decipher the difference between the different types
I
of?
mean, what if I wasn't? What if I wasn't having, like I say, that's my story. I was having postpartum depression. That's what I say. That's what comes out of my mouth.
Right.
But I might have just been going through some freaking heavy depression because of my situation.
Right. Right. And so when we talk about specifically, we can just say postpartum depression because that's what people are most familiar with. There are risk factors before you even give birth of things that could happen. So it could be just the notion that you are going to be shunned by your family and or church, or you have a big move coming up, or you're stressed out because you don't have a job, and so you might financially not be able to support this new baby. It could be an unplanned pregnancy, which is a whole other slew of things, right? That can happen, because I think the assumption is when you walk into a childbirth education class, at least, the teacher's going to assume, oh, you want this baby. Well, there could be moms showing up in there that did not want this baby, and this is unplanned. And that in itself can create a whole series of things.
Got it.
What I always tell families is that the label is not that important. I
Okay.
mean, it's what's important is that you are identifying the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And I always get the question, when do I know it's time to get help? When do I know, you know what? I should probably make a doctor's appointment. This isn't just a bad day. Like, this is something. And I always tell moms the rule of thumb is, if you've had these symptoms for more than 2 weeks and they are interfering with your daily life.
Got it.
So, if you're not, every new mom wakes up has a couple days where she doesn't take a shower, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that happens, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're depressed because you haven't taken a shower. But if after 2 weeks you haven't taken a shower, then there likely is something there. Go see
Okay.
somebody,
Okay.
right? Appetite changes, not getting a lot of sleep. Well, any mom's going to tell you, well, I'm not getting a lot of sleep, right? But if the lack of sleep is also in conjunction with all those other things going on, there might be something there.
Got it.
So
Thank you for breaking it down that way. I appreciate that. It actually, the way you broke it down, and this has nothing to do with anything, and I may totally
it's
regret
okay.
making this analogy here, but I work in the narcissistic abuse arena. That's my background, my story. And, women come to me all the time. I don't know if he's a narcissist. I don't know. So how do I know if he's a true narcissist? And it's like, girl, it doesn't matter if he's a real narcissist. Like,
Right.
if it's not working,
Exactly.
then you just have to make a decision, like stay or go. So
Yep.
similar here. It's like
Mhm.
postpartum, nope, not postpartum, girl. Like, if it's not jiving,
Yep.
then go see somebody.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Made it a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the term also, I think a lot of women want to know a term because I think a lot of us do Google searches, right?
Yeah.
We're like,
Yeah.
boop, 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 like, what is this? A lot of us use Google as our doctor. It's that safe space where we can kind of explore where we want to explore any sort of medical, whatever, online. And so, yeah, I mean, the good news is there are a lot of resources and there is a lot of good information online. So you are able to find things that are super helpful and things, that you can take to your doctor who may not be educated in this arena. And you can say, look, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I think I'm probably going to end up being diagnosed with. How can we treat this? And that's really it. And like you said, the label is not that important. If you're having symptoms, just talk about your symptoms, because any doctor should know how to treat those. They might just not know that label, which I can
Yeah.
equally be very frustrating, but it's the truth. I mean, there's so many doctors that are not educated, hence why we made the film. I mean, this film really is for medical providers. It's not for a mom to learn about postpartum depression. It is a very triggering film. It is very graphic. And it really is to show the extremes of what can happen if a doctor does not educate or bring up these disorders that can happen. And when a mom suffers in silence and suffers with no education about it, there are consequences. And that's what we show in our film.
Yeah.